5. A special report from ABC4 News. Academics amid the pandemic.
Thank you for watching this ABC4 special report. I'm Emily Clark. When it comes to reopening schools, so much still remains up in the air, leaving parents and teachers to deal with quite a bit of uncertainty. The Utah Health Department did introduce a COVID-19 school manual to help students, parents, and teachers navigate learning in person during the pandemic. This manual instructs students and school employees to follow the same quarantine and isolation guidelines for essential workers. That means parents may choose to send their child to school even if they are in quarantine if they do not have symptoms. Teachers may also go to work during quarantine if their employer allows it. This manual instructs parents to perform daily symptom and temperature checks on their students. We will make that full manual available on our website, abc4.com. Now, the Health Department school manual also includes justification for returning to in-person classes. It states that schools provide safe and supportive environments for students and teachers, including special education and health services for students. Students benefit from the interpersonal interactions that they get in school, and when schools are closed to in-person instruction, disparities in educational outcomes could become wider. Salt Lake City School District has chosen to start its classes fully online. The board voted to get kids back to school on September 8th and for students to return to class online with an amendment that students will get back into the classroom in-person learning as soon as possible. ABC4's Jason Wynn reports.
The school board's biggest concern to reopen Salt Lake City schools is the COVID-19 case count. Officials will be looking at the amount of cases per 100,000 people and a specific percentage.
We set a positivity rate of 5%. Right now, I think it's 9.6, and it's been trending down.
Here's what you need to know. August 18th through the 24th will be used as planning days for teachers, allowing them to learn new technology and meet with parents. The 25th through September 4th, the district will make sure all of the technology is in place. And September 8th, classes start.
Remote learning will be in place until the end of first quarter or until health conditions in our city improve, allowing us to bring our students back safely and sustainably into the classroom.
The district has upwards of 16,000 laptops, 1,000 iPads, 600 hotspots for students to sign out, and 8 schools with expanded Wi-Fi.
We want them to feel empowered to use that and to continue to engage throughout the remote learning period.
The district says students will be allowed to play sports, but there will be no fans at home games.
That was Jason Wynn reporting. Another concern for the board was how to continue offering student lunches. Officials say that there will be a program in place while students are learning remotely, similar to the grab and go program that they had in place at the beginning of this pandemic. Meanwhile, the Davis School District has changed its plans for fall. Students will now alternate between both in-person and online learning. Which days students are at home or in school will all be determined based on their last names. If children in the same household have different last names, the school district will go by the oldest student's last name, but families will stick together. Fridays will be at-home remote learning for all Davis County School District children. Now, following the decision to continue with a split schedule, Davis School District parents voiced some concerns of their plan. ABC4's Haley Hendricks has that story.
The negative impact, I feel, is that families and parents that are not trained or educated in the aspect of educating children will be forced to do 3/5 of the block of that education.
They'll be in a mask for 5-6 hours of that day, and they will not be able to interact with their chosen social groups. They'll be grouped quite differently. So as much as this idea of like, well, we really want our kids to get back to normal, this isn't going to look normal at all.
You're hearing from Davis County parents who tell us how they feel about Davis School District's back-to-school plan and how it could affect their students' well-being. If students are not enrolled in full-time online learning, the school district announced Tuesday that students will be in the classroom 2 days a week and have 3 days of online learning, all in an effort to limit the spread of COVID-19.
But I was encouraged to see the revision yesterday and the fact that it allows for social distancing of desks because they're alternating days that kids are in class and out of class.
I will be up front. I feel like the best place for kids is in school. 5 days a week, because the other days that the kids aren't in school, that they are collecting those exposures to COVID and illnesses through multiple contacts, either through childcare or just through regular family life.
While Kelly and Katie recognize there is no perfect solution, they say they are grateful to teachers for their efforts to continue educating their children. Reporting in Salt Lake County, Haley Hendricks, ABC4 News.
The Iron County School District will delay the start of their school year this fall. This past week, the Iron County School Board voted to begin classes on August 25th, giving their schools 2 more weeks to prepare for the first day of class. Students have the option of choosing either in-person classes or remote learning. If you want to know the reopening plan for your student's school district, we are tracking all of them as they are released. You can find that list on our website, abc4.com. As school districts across the state announce their plans to bring teachers and kids back to the classroom, a group of Utah doctors say those reopenings should simply be delayed. Dr. Brian Mensch, president of the Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment, says that teachers came to him with concerns about resuming in-person classes in a few weeks. He says that districts have not done enough to keep classrooms safe, like installing air purifiers. He's particularly worried that a return to school will cause a spike of COVID-19 cases, and not just in the schools.
Every one of these school kids will go home to a parent or 2 parents and maybe a grandparent or grandparents. All these teachers will go home to a family. So every bit of increased risk that we're expecting teachers and students to accept will be passed on to the entire community.
Now, besides maintaining social distancing and having students wear masks, he's also worried about the air students and teachers will be breathing in schools. He says the air could be 80% recirculated. He says classrooms need open windows for ventilation and air purifiers to prevent the spread of the virus. The Utah Education Association also wants to delay the return to in-person learning and instead continue with online distance learning. UEA President Heidi Matthews says schools should not open as it puts students, staff, and families at risk for contracting the virus. Matthews called on the governor, the State Board of Education, and local school districts to hold off on in-person learning until COVID-19 cases decline. And coming up, the president of UEA will be joining us live to discuss the reasons to delay in-person learning and how we can protect and support teachers during this pandemic.
You're watching ABC4 News, Academics Amid the Pandemic.
Welcome back, everyone, to this ABC4 News special report as we explore ways to resume schooling safely for both the students and the teachers. The Utah Education Association has pushed for school districts to delay the start of in-person classes. And joining us now is Heidi Matthews, the president of the Utah Education Association. Heidi, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, you and your organization have outlined a handful of principles to help guide the reopening of schools. And so I want to go through that this segment. The first being that the COVID-19 pandemic must be under control locally. So let's start with the concerns and the risks of returning to in-person learning in this fall, especially when it comes to teachers, because I think we've talked a lot about kids and the students, but teachers are just as important, if not more so, when it comes to this return to the classroom.
Well, thank you. And let me be clear that nobody wants to get back into our classrooms more than our teachers into face-to-face learning. We know that's what is best for our kids, to have face-to-face learning with a motivated, qualified teacher in a highly resourced classroom. But that said, what we have called on is for a level of standard before our students are entering back into face-to-face learning. And to be clear too, in calling for this delay, it's only in those areas where that standard has not been met in terms of mitigating the virus.
Now, let's talk about the second principle. Specific protections must be in place to keep the virus under control and protect students and staff. So let's talk about the training that you believe teachers would need before they could return to a classroom environment with what's going on around us, even if it's at a smaller level. What training would need to be happening for those teachers to be prepared?
Well, there are so many aspects of the protections, from the actual protective gear to the practices within the school to the sanitation, and it really does come down to a lot of the resources to be able to support that additional training for hybrid models, teaching in a hybrid way, teaching remotely, teaching in person, all at the same time. How are we going to ensure a compliance for making sure that 6 feet of physical distancing is met, especially with our large class sizes here in Utah? That's a great concern.
Now, have you seen this training happening in some school districts? Is that a reality for some and not for others? What have you seen currently here in our state?
Oh, absolutely. And since, last March when the world changed on a dime, there has been so much effort to try to get the resources to our teachers to better be able to address a new way of doing school, and that's evolving. The reality is, though, is we had a lot of districts who were doing very well with that prior to the pandemic, and some that just simply did not have the devices, the high-speed internet, the assurances of equity throughout our state that this pandemic has really exacerbated.
I think one thing the pandemic has done is really shown us where we can be better and what we need to improve. There's definitely a reality there. Let's talk about the third principle. Plans must be in place to protect school employee rights. So what are you hearing from teachers? Have they been discussed? Have they been, have their questions been met? Have they been addressed when it comes to making the decisions of whether or not to return to class in the fall?
Well, we see such a variance across the state. Some really good district plans that have taken the educator voice into the decision-making process, because of course the teachers and counselors and everyone else, the adults in the school, are going to be the ones implementing those practices, and then some areas where it hasn't, and the difference in the plan is quite noticeable. I think it's important to note that with our educators are feeling that their concerns have not been heeded, that they are sometimes being seen as more expendable, as that the other rights are being elevated, and we need to make sure that our educators know that they have a way of getting accommodations if they are in a high-risk category, that they can talk about workload considerations as they try to navigate all these different modalities, and that their issues of leave and quarantine and all of those other considerations are addressed in the school plans.
They have to be remembered. Such an important part of this process. Now to principle number 4 of these reopening principles from UEA. Plans must be in place to ensure continuous learning for all students. So we kind of talked about it just a moment ago, the gaps that we found. So how do these opportunities gaps impact students and teachers, and which groups do you feel are bearing kind of the brunt of this pandemic?
Well, and as I said before, what we have called for, what the Utah Education Association has called for, is a standard to be met. Just like what we teachers do when we're planning our lessons, we address that standard and we assess our progress against that standard. And that is absent in the guidance being given to our districts and our plans across the state. We want to make sure that the virus is under control in the areas, and those areas where it's not, that we delay the in-person teaching. It is our most vulnerable students who deserve the most attention, our students with special learning needs, our ELL, our language learning students, our students in poverty, our students in Black and brown communities that have been more impacted by this virus. We need to start with them, and that means addressing the needs that they had not only before the pandemic in order to be able to learn and thrive, but what have been the divide that has been exacerbated by COVID-19.
Now to the 5th principle from the Utah Education Association. Clear policies must be established for how these measures will be enforced consistently. So how do schools begin to enforce all of these measures that are going to have in place? How do you see that happening? or would like to see it happening?
Well, the second thing that we called for in our press release last week was for an approval process for each of the local plans. So it's been established by the State Board of Education. They've done a great job of identifying a number of areas that must be addressed in the plans. But where many of the districts are falling short is in terms of what happens when you don't meet that level of accountability? What happens when you can't keep our students 6 feet apart because you've got 40 kids in a class? What happens when we don't have the funds to be able to provide the sanitation equipment? What happens when we have a teacher for whatever reason who is at a higher risk, who doesn't have an acceptable level of accommodation, so that they're risking their own lives or the lives of their families in going to school? And so we want an approval process for the plans to make sure that they measure up with science, not just what's convenient, but what we know is going to be safe. And secondly, we want a process by which concerns can be raised and compliance can be assured without any of the people who raise those concerns having any fear of reprisal.
Okay, we're going to have to end it there for now, but we do have more with the Utah Education Association President Heidi Matthews. She's staying with us. We're going to continue our discussion right after this break.
ABC4 News, academics amid the pandemic.
Welcome back, everyone. As we continue our discussion on how to support and protect educators during this pandemic, we have Heidi Matthews with us, the president of the Utah Education Association. Heidi, we had a great discussion over the last segment. Let's continue now with one major concern is how to protect teachers who are considered high risk for complications related to coronavirus. How many teachers in Utah are considered high risk, and what alternatives to in-person schooling and protections are there or should be available to these educators?
Well, I think we have something like 40% of our teaching force is over the age of 50, but then when you combine that with extenuating circumstances that would make a person high risk, it's a considerable number of the adults who are in our schools, and the accommodations run everywhere from having to be something that's easily done on a school level to some that require some Americans with Disability Act consideration. And so it's so much on an individual basis, but in general we support the guidance of the State Board of Education to assure that there is a process by which every school district and every educator in the schools is able to identify as, yes, I'm a high-risk person, yes, I would like to speak with you about my individual circumstances, and then we as an association work with those individual circumstances to make sure that necessary accommodations can be made, be it working remotely, working in different supportive atmospheres. There are a wide range of different options for people.
Now, this is my final question. Our time, unfortunately, is running out. What's your advice for parents who feel, I need my student to be in school full-time so I can work? Many who frankly feel like, I have no other option, right, unfortunately. So what would you say to those parents right now who are saying, I love all of this, but I need to send my child to school?
I'm saying, I gotcha. I'm married to a teacher. If we had all 4 of our kids home at the same time, I don't know what we would have done in these circumstances. So my heart's with you. I think that this is a situation that calls for collaboration across our state. This cannot be something that falls solely under the responsibility of our education system to address. We can only do so much. We must have supervision for our families who are working. We recognize the economic impact of that. We must have more support for our younger students, and we must have more support for our students with learning challenges, and for our students in poverty and our students in Black and brown communities. And that falls on all of us. And the first thing we can do is drive that virus down. Driving it down in the community makes it safer for all schools everywhere. Second thing we can do is we can really target, zone in on those people who need the help the most, and we get them that. So that this doesn't become a question of open schools, don't open schools, and it's an argument. It's like, let's get those needs tended to so that we can get back to school.
Exactly,
we can do
Heidi.
it right.
Thank you so much. Heidi Matthews, I hate to break you off there. Such an important topic. Again, the Utah Education Association, if you want to learn more about what they are doing for our state, we've got all their information online at abc4.com, and we'll be right back.
You're watching ABC4 News, Academics Amid the Pandemic.
Welcome back. As we get closer to the school year, some parents are looking for alternate solutions. ABC4's education correspondent Sarah Martin spoke to a Utah mom who decided to hire a teaching aide.
Michelle Quist is a working single mother of 7.
I was just the worst mother, and I know a lot of women feel this way.
She's talking about schooling at home this spring.
It was a hot mess. You know, the internet connection is going on and off because you got 4 people on Zoom and someone's using the microwave.
Her 7 kids span a wide age range and level of need.
My youngest is 5. He has Down syndrome. He has had health issues. He has respiratory issues. I mean, we were in the hospital in February just with the common cold, with the rhinovirus.
Everyone at home needed at least a little help.
I couldn't work while I'm schooling them, and so I ended up, you know, staying up till 3 or 4 in the morning.
She said mom schooling was a non-starter for this fall.
I'm bringing in a teacher to spend dedicated hours with them each day. I'm really, really lucky to be able to do that.
She found help through a simple Facebook post, some resumes, and interviewing. The kids will be using the online curriculum provided by the school district. Michelle says it's going to be challenging financially, but she feels it's absolutely the right decision for her kids' safety and education.
I, you know, sit down to try to read with them and they just don't respond to me like they would somebody else, you know, a teacher at school or somebody coming in dedicated to teaching them that.
Michelle says it feels good to finally have a solid plan. Reporting, I'm Sarah Martin, ABC4 News.
Thank you for joining us for this ABC4 Town Hall. We'll see you right back here at 10 o'clock.